brief question if I could. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you sign the confidentiality agreement saying that you wouldn't discuss the kind of things that went on in your formulation of the standards?
I asked Chris Minnick that question last night, and he says, yes, I did.
You did?
I guess, yeah.
Oh, okay. And gosh, I hope you didn't reveal anything you're not supposed to.
Me too. You know, I tend to go out of control sometimes.
Were you troubled by that notion of having to sign a confidentiality agreement and something?
No, I think it's pretty normal, and I think I've signed confidentiality agreements whenever I'm doing work on developing some stuff. You wouldn't want commercial publishers, for example, saying, "Oh, McCallum, he's writing the standards. Maybe he'll give us a little bit of inside information about what's going to be on them." And you give one publisher a head start over all the other publishers because they can anticipate what to do. I think that was the point.
And one final question. I believe you understand that teachers, regardless if you want to add 15%, that you can't change a single word in the existing standards because they're copyrighted. You can add additional 15%, but that will not be on the assessments. Therefore, what would be the incentive for a teacher who's being evaluated based on the standards to teach additional materials which would not necessarily be reflected in the assessments?
So teachers, the standards are fairly removed from what teachers are doing in the classroom, in the sense that between the standards and the teacher, there's the curriculum. And that can be written in many different ways to achieve those same standards. So not being able to change a word in the standard, I don't think is going to mean that you can't have many different curricula that would achieve those standards. And teachers are really working with the curriculum, with the textbooks, with the exercises they're giving. They're not working with the standards directly. I think you've named an important issue with assessment, and it's come up before with assessment being, you'll have teachers teaching to the test and they don't have any incentive to do anything else. I think that's a big problem. I think it's something we have to worry about. We've heard some ideas about formative assessment that might help with that. So I agree, that's a concern. It's not a new concern. It's always been a concern. It's been a concern ever since No Child Left Behind came out in the Bush presidency. It's not a new problem. It's a problem, but it's not one that the Common Core doesn't make it better, it doesn't make it worse. It's a problem of how do we design assessments that give teachers the flexibility that don't tie them down.
Representative Ferg, then Vicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for your explanation and clearing up some of the concerns that we had over the last several days. I'm not quite sure what order to present these in, so I'm just going to kind of jump in here. Is it new? We've had conversation around having flexibility and teachers being able to teach things that will not be part of the test. So understanding that they'll decline from teaching them because they want to focus on the things that the children are tested on. It's been a long time since I've been, 5 years since I've been in high school. But can you tell me, is that new? I mean, I remember learning an awful lot of things that weren't actually on the test. I remember learning things in junior high and high school that weren't on the SAT, and an ACT test. Valuable stuff. But I mean, I don't recall personally there ever being a time where we didn't teach anything that, unless it was on the test, where there being a determination that there was no value to that, because it's not going to be on the test, or there not being time to teach that, because it's not going to be on the test. Am I incorrect in that?
No, you're completely right. Thanks very much for that question. It's not new. We've always had tests, and we've always had teachers, some of whom are the good sort of teacher who understands that the test is an assessment that they should pay attention to, but not something they should enslave their lives to. Then you probably do have other teachers who are more inclined to teach to that test and just do test prep. Good teachers have always looked at their class and thought, okay, this class is doing pretty well on the basics. Common Core does require them to do well on the basics. It requires them to master arithmetic in grades K through 5. But suppose you have a class that seems to be doing well, then that teacher can decide, oh, I think I'll add this. It'll help students. appreciate mathematics, it will give them more practice with problem solving. I should mention that in addition to standards for what students should know and be able to do, there are these standards for mathematical practice, which are more about the habits of mind, the mathematical ways of thinking and doing mathematics that students develop. And those standards are also standards, and they require things like making sense of problems and persevering in solving them. Well, a teacher who really wants to develop that practice in the kids might give them a whole bunch of extra problems that are maybe a little bit difficult. So there is an incentive in that, from that point of view, in the standards.
Oh,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, extra credit. I remember a lot of extra credit. Extra points for doing extra work, as well as extra knowledge. I don't personally have a concern around the copyright. I was asking some of my colleagues, every textbook that I have has copyright in it. So that's not a new concept to copyright intellectual property, if you will. And I can certainly understand why going through this process, especially for the reasons that you stated. And really, I think it's a protection for the school district specifically to prevent people from taking advantage of that from a commercial perspective. So I don't really understand why there is such a challenge with this information being copyrighted, because again, that's not something that I'm trying to be, I'm sorry, more comment than a question. Could you speak to this? You spoke a little bit, just very briefly in your testimony. We've had some comment about this in the last week. We currently have 41% of our students who are engaged in remedial coursework in their first year of college because of lack of college readiness. It comes from all parts of our states and all school districts. Will the standards that we have in place reduce that number? And I guess the follow-up to that is, at what point from implementation do you see us starting to see the ticking up of student performance?
So standards by themselves don't do anything, right? Because they're just a document. What will bring about change is implementation of the standards, and is teachers taking them seriously. A lot of the things that we've heard before about topics that the teacher didn't want in Algebra 2, I certainly appreciate that in the sense. Those topics are there because that's what's required for the students to be ready for college and not be remediated when they get to college. So if the standards are taken seriously, if they're implemented, if we have a teaching force that can deliver them, if we have assessments that are wise and humane, that help students grow, yes. But that's all work to be done by you, all, in this state. It's not the work of the standards. The standards just said they give you a platform on which to stand to do that work.
Yes, ma'am.